This is Inside M&A with Dave Cantin. Conversations for the industry.
On this episode of Inside M&A, we're joined by Dave Cantin, who's the president and CEO of the Dave Cantin Group, and Stephen Dietrich, who's an accomplished M&A attorney and author of his new book, Fear Dynamics. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us, Jim.
Sure. So let me start with you, if I can, Stephen, since you're the specialist in the area of M&A legal. What are some of the top things that dealers should consider from a legal perspective when they think about, before they make that call to Dave to say, I think I'm interested in selling my dealership? What should they consider?
Well, I think they need to think about a couple of things on a personal level. What do they actually want out of the deal? Why are they doing this? Why are they thinking about it? Is it an estate planning issue? Is it some sort of monetary event? Whatever it might be. So figure out what their actual goals are. And obviously the short goal is to sell it for as much as humanly possible. But what are they going to do with all this? And what do they want to try to preserve? Sure. And then from an organizational standpoint, I think they really need to figure out how to get their shop in order. Is there anything that they have been doing that they want to clean up, or that they haven't been doing? And if they had to tell everyone, hey, this is what my business is, are they comfortable telling everyone what their business is? Sure. Are there things that they can clean up? Because before you start talking to someone is the time to get your house in order and figure out the hard questions. And that can be done with a conversation with someone like Dave or your accounting folks or whatever it might be. But you should really think about it before you decide to sell, because it might take some time to clean that stuff up. And then if other people are owners involved, make sure you talk to them before you decide to sell.
Yeah, is that pretty much the advice that you give when somebody calls you to say, hey, there's things we got to talk about here?
Well, the first thing we do, and to Steve's point, getting your house in order, right? Yeah. Making sure you're prepared to represent your acquisition, making sure that you're prepared in all areas to maximize the evaluation. Right. What it comes down to is just making sure that everything that we want to represent, we have in place and we're able to properly represent it. And most importantly, to create the greatest evaluation, to Steve's point. In order to do that, we have to make sure we're capturing everything and it's operating at its maximum capability. So we do enjoy spending more time with the client preparing for the acquisition and not just having a call on a Monday saying, hey, can you have me sold in 30 days? So time is of the essence.
Right. It's not like they're sticking a sign in front of your in their lawn, right?
Exactly.
How much time typically should a dealer expect in that realm?
In the preparation phase?
Yeah. Is that a year-long process? Is it
it really depends. Is it a single point dealership? Is it 5 stores? Is it 20 stores? Yeah. Do you have an executive leadership team of 5 people or 2 people or 20 people? Right. So it really depends on how much, what their infrastructure is like, how big the acquisition is, how many stores it's comprised of. Sure. Is there real estate? Is there multiple different parcels of real estate? Right. We really like to take our time on building the greatest story for the acquisition. Sure. Your average timeline is about 30 to 45 days. Okay. The larger the acquisition, yes, it could take 60 to 90 days of prep work. Right. And that really is to benefit the seller, but also to benefit the buyer, because we want to create the greatest story and timeline with limiting how many questions they have to come back at us, because the more information we have, the easier it is for them to understand the acquisition and to properly evaluate the acquisition.
Sure. And I know with the Dave Cantin Group, you guys you're multifaceted. So when a client comes to you or a dealer comes to you and says, hey, I think I'm ready to sell, let's talk about it, you can actually bring up the necessary parties, right? Such as relationships like this one, where you can say, hey, we've got somebody for you in that realm, whether it be an accounting firm or attorney or whatever. Talk to me about the importance of that.
Because, it's critically important, and it's something that we're really proud of at the Dave Cantin Group, having the right relationships in the business to really help our clients. Yeah. Stephen Dietrich and Holland Knight is a huge resource for our clients to really be able to have a leading M&A attorney. Steve does much more than just M&A, but a leading attorney in the space and a team behind that attorney that could help them ensuring that they're properly ready for a sale as well, right? There are a lot of things that need to be done to prepare them legally as well. But it's not just at the time of a sale that it's important to have a guy like Steve next to you and his team. It's important from day one of being in business. Yeah. We talk about this all the time, succession planning, making sure that your ducks are in a row, that you have that path, that journey that allows you to ultimately one day get to that place of exiting or transitioning your business, and having the great resources around you. And part of our company is great. Sure. Having the right CPAs, the right attorneys, the right bankers, the right people around you that builds a solid team that prepares you for that day that might be 20 years down the road or 5 years down the road.
Yeah, no question about it. And having a huge law firm like you've got behind you has got to be very comforting for a dealer that's saying, I'm turning over, whether it be one dealership or 15, this transaction's got to go right.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. I mean, an auto dealership, one dealership, 10, 20, 30, there's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the M&A function. There's, employment matters, benefit matters, there's, God forbid, litigation. So there's a lot of things that go into both operating that business, but then also dealing with it to sell that particular business. So I think, and the accounting function is equally important, just to make sure everyone understands what's happening. So you really need those resources.
What do you say to that individual that goes, listen, I hear what you're saying, but I've got a brother-in-law, and he handled my corporation, and he handled my divorce, and I think I'll just let him handle this. I mean, do you get those scenarios?
The number of times a week might I get that conversation? Right. So my first statement is I play well with others.
Okay.
And then my second one is they have all the information. We talked earlier about needing the history. That individual has all of that history, so they can really be efficient.
Sure.
And so I really like to look at it as a team. I'm just coming in, I've got a particular expertise. We know how to get this particular thing done.
Right.
And the rest of the team is already in place, or pieces of it. Let's use all of them to move it forward. So it's not a combative issue, but it's like that person was really great for what they did when you needed it and when we were available. It's probably best to get the right resource to be efficient at this point in time to move it forward. That's how I try to answer that question, because and that's the truth. It's not just a canned answer. I'm going to ask that person all these questions anyways.
Yeah.
So let's bring everyone into the team and let's all roll in the same direction.
That's a good idea.
And those individuals become extremely resourceful because they have information that Steve's going to need throughout the process.
That's right.
And it's like anything else, right? You go to your primary care doctor, you're not going to say, Doc, can you look at my tooth? I have a toothache.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
They're going to say, I'm going to send you to the dentist. Well, Steve's the dentist, right? So, putting the right parties together allows the greatest opportunity for a smooth transition.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's the biggest deal of that individual's life, right? I mean, that to entrust it with anybody else that has not gone down this path before of an M&A situation, then you're playing with fire, right?
Well, you get one shot at this,
right?
And you want to make as few mistakes as possible. And so the nice thing with folks like myself and Dave Cantin's group, we've been through a bunch of different things. We can at least ask the question, hey, have you thought about these 5 things?
Sure.
As opposed to someone who may not have. It's not because they're not smart enough to solve those issues. They just haven't seen them.
They just haven't been there.
And so if we can ask the question before you go to prime time, you can figure out the answer. You can figure out how to deal with the question and move it on forward. So that's really there's a real value in just that repetition over the years of doing all these deals.
Dave, how many times do you get the call where somebody says, I've got a partner in this business, I want to sell? That's a unique set of circumstances too, right? Especially from a legal standpoint.
It's more common than you would think, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's got a partner, right? I mean, pretty much, right?
Right.
Even if it's a dealer that has a significant other or spouse,
sure,
that's a partner in the business,
that's right.
And they're very respected in all decisions. But to answer your question, there are a lot of auto groups that have multiple families, multiple partners, and it is typically where the one partner makes the initial phone call and schedules that first in-person meeting, and not always is the other partner there in that meeting, right? And you're like, wait, are all sides in agreement?
Well, we tell out of school here.
Or aware of the meeting.
Or aware of the meeting, yes, exactly. You're right.
That's right.
And you're kind of trying to figure out, right, the dynamic of the relationship of the partnership. Because before you could get into really the acquisition, you got to dissect the partnership.
Of course.
To really understand, okay, there's story A, there's story B, there's 2 individuals, 3 individuals. Where is the real reason that this is coming from, that this is stemming from?
Right.
So that's the first task whenever there's a partnership, just to make sure, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to all members of the business.
Yeah.
So we have to meet with everyone. We can't just take lead from one individual unless all parties say, this is who you're doing business with. This is who's going to give you the lead, and go forward.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging time when there's multiple partners to ensure everyone's on the same page. I'm sure for you as well.
Well, it can. I mean, and sometimes the more challenging partners are the ones that are unwritten partners. Like spouses or brothers or sisters that should have an interest, and maybe the parent hasn't quite done the corporate planning appropriately beforehand. So.
That's out there in the car business?
I know it's shocking. It's shocking.
Really? I never thought about that.
And I'll say this, it's actually the most challenging when they don't have that succession plan in place and estate planning in place.
For sure.
Now you have 3, let's say, older kids in the business that have been in a business for 15, 20 years or even longer. Yeah. And 1 or 2 thinks that they're in a higher position than the third. Yeah. And, mom or dad passes away and it's like, okay, who gets to take the baton and run, and really there's nothing written.
Sure.
So now you have what you have happening there is now three people arguing that's now causing a distraction within the business. And before you know it, that then becomes a real family dynamic issue inside the business, outside of the business, but it most affects the business.
Yeah.
It's so important on so many levels.
In a conversation like that, it's interesting how someone's views may change if they're thinking, hey, we're about to have an exit event.
Yeah.
Then people start to see dollar signs and other issues. Whereas if you talk about those issues before a thought of exiting the business, then someone will be like, yeah, I really don't want to be that involved in the business because I don't want to be operating and running it. But if they're thinking, hey, I'm 6 months away from getting a pile of money potentially, those conversations are very different. Yeah. So, to your earlier point, think about these issues even before you think of selling. Yeah. To get all your ducks in a row, because then you're like, okay, great, now we're ready to go forward.
Right.
One of the most challenging things that we deal with, especially when there's partners, is having to relay messages, right? As you're working the acquisition. Because typically you just pick up the phone and kind of say, okay, this is where we're at, or I need to talk to you on this. Yeah. But it's now, okay, we need to get a conference call. Oh, we need to get multiple people on the phone. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that's challenging for you as well while you're negotiating the agreements and everything else. How do you deal with Are you always getting all parties on one call?
Well, we try, if there's multiple parties that are going to be active, we try to have a conversation and say, one of you has to be our point of contact. Yeah. And we will often do like a kickoff call explaining this to all the partners and get everyone involved on that side of it. And then some people will come in and say, look, I want to be involved, and they're along for the ride. Sure. And then other times before we actually sign something, we'll get them all back together again and say, look, have you all looked at this agreement? Do you understand? And walk through those issues. But it just depends on how, sometimes you can tell some people are extraordinarily communicative, and other folks, you talk to them on day one, and then you know that person hasn't been involved for 90 days, and then you're like, hey, can you sign this document? And like, what document? I have no idea what you're talking about. So you really have to read the room and figure out that. But it's our job to figure those things out to help the transaction go smoothly.
Right. What's the most common mistakes dealers make that from your perspective? And I'll start with you. Where do you see the pitfalls, or the mistakes, I should say, that dealers make?
In what part of the process?
Yeah, exactly, right.
I think the biggest piece of it is not understanding what's going to happen. Okay. So if you're selling and realizing that you know your business really, really well, and everything is sort of intuitive to you, whereas a buyer coming in, even if they really understand the business, so they're in the business, they run their own dealerships, they don't know your dealership. Right. And so understanding that there is going to be a ton of questions, and not to take them as attacks or personally. So, well, why do you do it this way? Why do you set up this way? Why is your sales process this way? These are just a ton of questions coming, and asking everything about your business and realizing that's just part of the process. Yeah. And what I try to counsel and talk to my selling clients are saying, this is your opportunity. It's one of your few opportunities to educate the buyer and tell them why your dealership is as valuable as you think it is. Right. You don't have a lot of opportunities to directly do that. Sure. So when the buyer's coming in and asking these questions, don't take it as an attack that you need to defend what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Take it as an opportunity to educate them on why you did a really great job, and explain if there's some odd things, maybe because of the market you're in. I know there's one dealership I worked with that one of the big models was the remote delivery. They made a ton of money on the remote delivery side of it, but it only because of the weird geography of where they were. Sure. And they had to explain that to someone. But if they took it as an opportunity, it's like, this is why we're unique. This is an opportunity for you, rather than, hey, I know better than you type of thing. That's if you had asked me once, that's the biggest issue, is engaging as a collaborative effort and an educational effort to the buyer. That would be the biggest mistake I see, is people getting defensive.
I see you shaking your head. You obviously
agree. I completely agree. I mean, that is, the more we know, the better they're going to be, right? The more the buyer knows, the easier it's going to be. Yeah. So when a seller kind of gets defensive when a buyer has questions, you don't immediately try to defend it. You want to help them. Yeah. Help them understand it. Help them understand why you do certain things, to Steve's point. Sure. In different geographic areas, in different brands, there's different ways to operate, maybe in the area you're in. And it's important that they know that. I'll tell you, one of the biggest mistakes I see dealers make all the time is they really don't know what their obligations are pre-acquisition. Meaning they have assumed obligations. It's kind of funny because every acquisition I'll say, all right, give me your assumed obligations. They're like, what do you mean?
Right.
Every contract that you have signed that you're obligated to for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And a week later, I'll get a bundle and they'll call me and go, oh, we need to talk about this and this and this and this and this and this.
Many dealers and GMs don't know that, because it could be a contract that the previous GM signed. They're not even using that software anymore, or whatever the case might be. They're paying for it every month.
Sometimes they have 3 different companies they're paying to give them used car values.
That's right.
They have 2 different CRMs set up.
Yeah.
They're still obligated to a whole nother system that operates fixed ops that they don't use anymore.
Yeah.
And then they realize that, and they're like, wait, who's paying for that? Well, of course you are.
Exactly. And it's not as easy as, go ahead and cancel that. It doesn't work that way. You signed a 1-year contract.
I'll say this, it's a lesson.
Yeah.
And for dealers that are divesting of one dealership and they realize that, the funny thing is it helps them in the future, because then they go back to their stores and they pull every single contract they have.
Oh, yeah.
And now every agreement they sign from that moment forward is 30 days.
That's right.
Yes.
More work done by Stephen.
That's exactly right. So in a major closing like this, is it typical that a dealer can expect that there's going to be a certain amount of money held back in reserves for a set period of time that says, look, it's all well and good, but we're going to hold back X number of dollars in some sort of an escrow just in case there's some kind of surprise that pops up?
I'm probably going to get hate mail on this one, but that's all right, because it really does depend. I mean, what you're really talking about
depends. Each deal's different.
But the concept is, a buyer wants to have somebody standing behind the promises that the seller makes.
Sure.
And so the real simple way to look at that is, yes, money is one way to do that.
Yeah.
So, but then a seller may be motivated. This gets to the motivational side of it. Some sellers will say, look, I'm done when we close this thing. I'm walking away.
Right.
So therefore, go ahead and take that pile of money.
Right.
And we'll put it there. We'll let it sit there. Okay. Or I'm confident I'm going to be engaged in this, and I will stand behind that. It's more valuable for me to have those dollars in my pocket, because whatever I want to do with them.
Sure.
And I will just stand there and say, if something's wrong for the X period of time, I personally will stand behind it. So those are the biggest ways to sort of slice and dice it, but that's what it gets to. So I'd hate to say, yes, there's always a holdback, because I negotiate against them all the time, but the concept is something to stand behind the seller's promises, because once the assets are gone and the deal's done.
That's right.
They want to have some way to get to the money if they're owed.
That's right.
So it's either a person or a pile of money.
That's right.
It's really kind of
it's always easier if it's a pile of money.
I do. People would prefer that. I think that's yes.
Yes, exactly. And I think dealers, for the most part, understand that. I was involved in a deal like that, where at the end of the day, we're like, we get that.
Typically, it's like you personally indemnified, right? You're signing off for it, or you're giving a pile of money where it removes your personal indemnification.
That's right.
And if you did everything right and you honored what was in that agreement, the money's coming back to you most likely.
That's right.
I mean, there are acquisitions that there is acquisitions that there's buckets of money put to the side for WEOs and different types of scenarios, which is very marketing customary. But at the end of the day, as long as the contract is done in a way the dealer says, I could support it, any money that's left there to make the buyer feel at ease is coming back to you.
Yeah. Dave, what happens when a dealer calls you, and you've probably gotten this call before, that says, look, my son runs the new car division, my other son runs the used car division, my daughter is the F&I director, my wife runs the back office, okay, and we're going to sell the group or sell the dealership, but we're all leaving on a plane to Florida the day that deal closes. Does that create a kind of a challenge for you?
My first question always, and I've had this happen several times, maybe not in that order,
of course,
but it's happened.
Yeah.
My first question is why?
Yeah.
Now you're going to say, well, hold on, don't you get paid to do it? What are you saying why for? Because I really want to know.
Sure.
Why? Because the buyer is going to ask me why.
Right.
So the first question they're going to ask me, I'm going to ask you up front. Why?
Yeah.
You've been in this business for how many years?
Sure.
You brought your family and raised your children in this business.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And that's a really important question. And sometimes the why is simple. Sometimes it's not so simple.
Yeah.
And if the why typically is the next generation just doesn't want to have a future in this industry, okay, I got it.
Right.
And everything can be explained. And the point of maybe them running each department is hopefully there's somebody that could continue running the departments upon their exit.
Of course.
Or we're very transparent in the acquisition, letting them know, hey, you need a fixed ops manager.
Yeah.
You need a finance director. You need a general manager. And then when you're looking at the evaluation and the acquisition, you're putting in your pro forma a budget for those numbers.
Does that hurt the valuation of a deal if in the event the management company's going to be gone on day one of that new owner, does that hurt the valuation?
It depends on the acquisition,
Okay.
right? So if it's a performing asset,
Okay.
and the asset does really well,
Yeah.
removing anything or changing anything is a negative,
Okay.
right? It's not good,
Okay, yeah.
because you're buying the performance of the current asset. Well, if you're removing what's driving the performance,
Yeah.
the asset is going to be worth a lot less.
Okay.
If it's a drastically underperforming asset, and that asset only has room to grow, well, most likely it's probably that person or in the group of individuals
That needs to go.
that needs to go, right? And you want them
That's the
out.
good news, right?
So it could go either way.
Yeah.
Well, it might also depend on the buyer.
Yeah.
If you have a buyer
That's
that
true, too.
has
Yeah.
a lot of human capital,
Yes.
and they want to find places to move people up in their organization, this may
Right.
be a golden opportunity.
Right.
So they may look at it and say, "This is awesome. We can bring it in, and we have places to put some people that we've been tamping down."
Sure.
If they're short on human capital, then they might be like, "Wait, how are we going to run this business?"
yeah,
So then
sure.
it would, I think, negatively affect value there.
This is a question for both of you, and that is, I'm a dealer. I give you a call, Dave, and I say, I want to sell the operation, but I want to hold on to the real estate. What do you say to that seller? Good
So-
idea, bad idea? Do you get that scenario?
It's a very typical scenario.
It is? Okay.
Because they want to be in there. They want to keep that cash flow.
Yeah.
Okay. The automotive industry is on the retail side has always been combined of two businesses: the real estate business and the asset.
Yeah.
Right. The goodwill
Sure.
of operating your car dealership, but they go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You buy the land to operate the car dealership. You operate the car dealership to build value in the land.
That's right.
And as you keep re-imaging the facilities, because we know the manufacturers every few years want the facility re-imaged, it's only beneficial to invest that into the building, but also invest it into the property and
Yeah.
own the property.
Yeah.
So we always recommend, if you want the greatest value for the asset, the real estate has to go with it.
Okay.
If you could be okay maybe losing 10 or 20% of the value of the asset,
Okay.
hold on to the real estate.
Okay.
And if we really get a lot of pushback, we'll try to negotiate and say to the seller, look, here's what we think is best. You obviously want the biggest number up front.
Mm-hmm.
What if we did a very short-term lease, give you a few years of cash flow,
Good idea.
and then the buyer has the option to purchase the real estate at appraised value at that time.
Sure. If you were to chime in on the legal side of that, is it a good idea for dealers to try to hold on to the real estate?
I think it does depend. I mean, one of the things is, as Dave mentioned, when someone's getting out of the business, suddenly they're not getting that monthly cash flow into their bank account. So that's why they really want to do that. And
Although it should be replaced by the interest on the money in the bank.
but you would be shocked, and how many folks they've spent their lives in this, and they understand reinvesting in their own business,
Right.
but they really aren't comfortable investing in other stuff. And so
Right.
there's that particular.
Okay.
There's an emotional hurdle saying, like, I understand this asset, I understand how I'm going to make money.
Yeah.
I don't understand that yet. I'm going to need to learn. So I get how they hold on to it, but I think Dave's right in the sense that most sellers want to buy that particular real estate for whatever reason the asset may be. Although I do think they're starting to see a shift in that, either because of the value of the real estate, being rather high, or the types of buyers.
Yeah.
Because now it's a financial instrument.
Yeah.
At this point in time, to have to buy that real estate, especially if it's a larger transaction, to commit that amount of basically equity
Yeah.
that goes into the real estate maybe not be a smart move at this point in time. And so they may be like, okay, great, we'll lease the property, but I do think that at some point in time,
There's got to be
there's
some.
got to be some
10
ability.
years,
There's got to
20
be
years,
some
yeah.
ability, whether it's a right of first refusal in the lease
Sure.
or an option at some point in time. If nothing else, because that buyer at some point in time wants to exit themselves.
Right.
And the last thing they want to do is then to sell to somebody who then has to negotiate with a landlord that's 2 deals removed.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation.
That's
So I
right.
do think
That's
a buyer is going to want to have the ability to control the real estate.
Sure.
The economics, I think, may change, and I think we're starting to see more willingness to do leasing structures or those sorts of issues, just because that money can be used in more productive ways than
Sure.
piling it into real estate.
Sure. There was a deal that I was involved in. I worked for an auto group, and they bought a store, and the seller said, we want to lease the property back. We don't want to sell it. Well, after talking to the OEM said, look, here's the deal. We want a brand new facility built anyway, and we don't even want it there. That part of town kind of went down. So we want you to, if you're going to buy it, we'd like a new facility in the next 2 or 3 years, in another part of town that we'll approve. So that worked out perfectly.
Yeah,
Have you
sure,
found that
sure.
to be the case where it's
Absolutely.
like, oh, thank God they want to hold on to the real estate?
Well, and just talking about what Stephen said about really understanding the business dynamic.
Yeah.
Today more than ever, especially with high interest rates.
Yes.
Right. We always
right.
look at, as a business owner, you always want to look at what's your return, right? What is your return on capital? What's your return on investment? Well, when you're looking at really the average return of a new car dealership today on the asset side, it's almost double what it is on the real estate side. So to Stephen's point, if you could get away with leasing the dealership, there are a lot of large companies today that are operating in the auto industry that are actually saying we don't need to buy the real estate. We would rather use our capital to buy more businesses than to buy the real estate, because we're going to double our return on the business side than the real estate side. It really matters, is this going to be a ultra long-term asset? And to Steve's point again about what happens if they want to exit in 10 or 20 years, sometimes you want to have full control over that, where you're not bringing an acquisition to market down the road that now somebody has to again negotiate with someone who left the business 20 years ago, or the next generation. Sure.
And with regard to the leasing the property, would it also be safe to say that it's based on the brand itself? I might need the real estate if it's a Mitsu store, but I might be a lot more open if it's a Toyota franchise where the owner says, I gotta own the property for 20 years. That's okay, I'll do whatever you want to do. I just need the Toyota store.
Listen, it all comes down to opportunity, right? We all know Toyota, Lexus, BMW, there's some brands out there today that as they become available, it's a lot easier for a seller to make their demands, and it's a lot more likely that a buyer is gonna say, okay, because it's an opportunity you might only get once in your lifetime.
That's right.
It may also depend on where it's located. Real estate in some of these metro areas, someone may be willing to take a risk and say, look, I don't really care. I don't know what's going to happen. Even if I have to relocate, that piece of real estate will be used for something else. And so that there's really not that much energy of either letting them keep it because they are going to relocate, or the buyer may be like, look, I'll buy it. I don't care if you want to get rid of it because it's maybe a bad brand or something of that sort, because they're going to be able to use that real estate for something else in that particular market. So the market, I think, is really important as well to that decision.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate all the time that you've given us on the show, but just a couple of other things here as we close out the segment. If you had to tell a dealer, what are the things that you really need to focus on when you enter into this from a legal standpoint? From you're sitting there and you've got a somebody that calls you and says, okay, I'm about to jump into this thing. What do I really need to focus on?
I think you really need to focus on what do you want out of this transaction.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of folks are thinking, well, I just want money, and that's what they're thinking about. I've seen more and more a mix of, obviously we want right value, but they want their business to go to a good buyer, someone who's culturally aligned to them. So why are you doing this? Is there a dispute in the family and you can't resolve it, and therefore you just need to get rid of the business? Is it a fire sale type of situation?
Yeah.
Is this a long-term planning issue because you want to use the money for something else? So I think really understand why you want to go through this, and then take the time to realize that it is going to be a process.
Sure.
And there's going to be times when it's fun, there's going to be times when it's maddening, and there'll probably be a couple times when you swear at all of your advisors, and why'd you get me into this? I think they should just realize that side of it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is to be truthful, to be ready to answer whatever the questions are, the good, the bad, or the ugly.
It's coming out anyway.
It's coming out one way or the other. If you got a good buyer, they're going to dig in and they're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
So be prepared to answer those particular questions, and don't be embarrassed about them. Chances are, whatever decision you made, even though I may not disagree with it, and the buyer may be like, why did you do that? There was a reason you did it.
Yeah.
And just say, this is what I did, this is why I did it, and move on down the path. Try to disconnect a little bit from the emotion at some level, because the selling decision is very emotional. I don't care why they're doing it, it's pure emotion.
Yeah.
But when you go through the process, you have to step away from your emotions a little bit and realize there's just a process to go through, and try to realize that piece of it, and find time to be emotional, because there will be moments in time when you are emotional, because it's the biggest decision of their life.
That's right. It kind of is their life.
It is.
I've worked for dealers, and it just so much they're part of the
who
fabric
they are.
of that city, and their kids grew up in the business, and they're there every day, and they know every single one of the associates on a first name basis. You find that to be the case.
So many acquisitions that we work with.
Of course.
The transition exiting for the seller is the most difficult thing.
Right.
Because throughout the entire process, they're thinking of the honeymoon phase of after the transaction. Once I'm closed, where I'm going to be, what beach I'm going to be on.
Yeah.
Where are we going to buy our secondary home? But what they don't think about is removing themselves from the community.
Yeah.
The philanthropy that they've done throughout the decades of being there.
That's right.
I say this all the time.
Yeah.
Auto dealers are a group of the most resilient, unbelievably philanthropic entrepreneurs there are.
I know.
They are heavily integrated into their communities.
That's right.
And when they sell and exit a community, that's trauma for them.
right.
It's to work through that, and typically it doesn't happen until the very end.
That's
when
right.
they realize, wow, like I'm no longer now integrated into this community by way of my car dealership or car dealerships.
And if it was Smith Automotive Group and they had 25 stores in that location, and the new company comes in and goes, oh yeah, we're changing those. We're changing the sign. We're changing the name to the organization. Now, no longer are they the Smiths of that.
Of course, and look, it's a more challenging time than we're in today, right? In the height of COVID, right, it was much easier for us to walk buyers and sellers through the timelines and to get an acquisition done. We're working harder today. We're working harder today because the industry is much tougher today than it's ever been. Steve, I'll ask you this because I ask people in my company and our competitors and our colleagues all the time in the space. It's more difficult today because there's more challenges that are involved in an acquisition today that have been here for a long time.
Sure.
And one of the things that we always have to do, and I'm curious to hear from you, Steve, is how to walk a client through a very challenging, tough situation. You get that call, the appraisal's off by 10 million. You get the call, the environmental came back really bad.
Oh boy.
You get the call from the OEM, hey, we want your buyer to build a $16 million facility. How do you address the seller? How quickly do you get on the phone? How do you react? Walk us through how you handle that.
Well, you want to get on the phone immediately or communicate them with at some point in time so that at least you can slow their mind down and actually think about, is this really a problem? Were they aware of it? I mean, the $60 million facility, hopefully it's not a shock that the manufacturer wasn't holding that back. The environmental issue, that may be a curveball out of left field, but you talk to them about environmental issues, say, well, this is going to come up anyway. So you still want to sell, assuming you still want to sell, you're going to have to deal with this with any buyer.
Doesn't matter.
Now we know, let's figure out the right way to do this. And a lot of the times there's a process, and the states, regardless of the state, many of them are like, look, we'll work through, however bad the situation is. So what you really want to do is try to slow their mind down. I mean, there have been a couple times when I've actually talked to clients and said, just take a moment, take 3 deep breaths, then let's talk about it and see what actually, it's not this huge problem. Maybe it's just this small issue. That's a horrible curveball. And so typically there's a solution somewhere in there, because a lot of the curveballs that come are things that any buyer is going to force them to deal with. So it really crystallizes the situation to say, yeah, it is horrible that this came up in this particular situation, but unless you are going to take your dealership or dealership group off the market and deal with it internally, move on down the road and not sell, we got to deal with it.
One way or another.
And once you put it in context like that, then the resiliency, the creativity, the can-do attitude, whatever adjective you want to use that is endemic to almost every car dealer I've ever met, will kick in. And all right, how do we solve this problem? Let's deal with it. It's there. Now I know what it is. I know I've painted it. I figured out what it is, and I can attack it. So it's those initial shock of, oh my God, the deal's going to fall apart, or the buyer's going to walk away. You also have to realize that the buyer probably is shocked about it as well. And they still want to get the deal done. So you hopefully have reasonable people on both sides of that. And if you can all calm down for a second, you're going to figure out how to get through it.
I'm telling you, we all need a Stephen Dietrich in
I
our
was
lives
just thinking the same
to
thing.
tell us to take a few deep breaths.
You missed your
calm
calling.
down.
Exactly.
Look, speaking of that, Jim's holding a book.
Yes, I am.
Fear Dynamics.
I
just want to take a few moments and talk about this because
That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Being such an incredibly influential leader in the automotive industry, which you are, I say that all the time, to be able to write a book that I believe took you almost 8 years from initially putting the pen to paper to publishing to getting that book out there. Congratulations on 1 week of it being out there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
But
Thank you.
I want to talk about that because a lot of people don't know this, but I'm a very vulnerable individual. And over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, I've learned to tap into vulnerability where, it becomes one of your greatest attributes when you can be vulnerable, then instead of being more masculine and more aggressive and being shy or being more, impulsive. And it's taught me to be extremely rational and calm. And it's taught me so much in life, but to have someone that's able to write it down and put it all out there into the universe in that book, in that story, I applaud you because not many people have the courage to do what you did by writing this book. And it is an absolute phenomenal story that I mean, transformed your life and many others around you. So tell us about this, because what made Stephen Dietrich wake up one day and say, I need to tell the world my story?
Well, I realized that I had changed in my particular life and really wanted to tell people about it. When you learn something and you realize, at least when it affected me so deeply, that I felt I needed to tell people about it. And one of the things that I realized is I'm objectively a successful person in our society. I mean, whatever you want to say about me, fine, but I have achieved X. And I thought I have potentially a unique platform. If I can talk about this, to get people to talk about these anxiety issues, you know, you don't necessarily have the same backstory that I have, but a lot of people have anxiety or fear. Sure. And this talks about the fear and the anxiety with relationships, which I think is really interesting. It's not the fear of, hey, I'm afraid of heights, I don't want to jump off this cliff into that body of water. It's, I get anxious when I'm talking to people. Yeah. And I spend my life dealing with people. So it was this constant level of anxiety. And we all are in a business, unless we're literally running our own business with nobody else involved, you're going to interact with people. Of course. And so it was really important for me to think if I can contribute in some way, shape, or form to people talking about it. Yeah. Because one of the things is people don't talk out loud about it. That's right. You know, the three of us could walk around and go, okay, yeah, I got this bad knee because I did this, or you know, my son hit me with a baseball bat or something. You know, whatever. You can talk about all those sorts of things and why that's hindering your business or you achieving a goal or whatever it might be. But you don't talk about the fact that, boy, I'm really nervous to talk to you today. Right. You know, or I get nervous when I publicly speak, or I get nervous when I talk to clients on the phone call. Sure. Why can't we talk about that the same way we talk about other aspects? Sure. And so that was really a driver of mine to talk about that. And that's great. And you know, I'm fortunate that I'm successful and have a little bit of credibility on that side of it. And so I thought, well, if not me, who might be willing to talk about it? Because there aren't a lot of people. That's right. And the other piece, just to finish it, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, is the story is I think really a one of hope, because I went through all that change, but didn't change the vast majority of my life. Yeah, I'm still a lawyer. Yeah, still married to my wife. Still live in Denver. Yeah. Before I wrote the book, I lived in Denver, and I still live in. So my life on the outside is really very similar.
Just made it better on the inside for you.
But I experienced the world so much differently. Yeah, and I thought that's got to be hopeful. Yeah. Because a lot of people, I think, would love to be able to inspiring. Be happier, but not have to blow their life up.
That's right.
And so those are the long answer to a short question.
No, it's a great answer.
That's what got me here.
Yeah. It's a great answer, and I'm so proud of you for doing so. So you launched a book last Tuesday.
Yes.
You woke up last Tuesday. You now know the world knows your story. Right?
That's right. It's a good point.
How do you feel? Like, how did you feel that Tuesday when you woke up? Did you have anxiety? Did you have fear?
Well, I've worked through a lot of that before I let that out. But yes, I mean, it is interesting to think about. A lot of people that I work with, there's a lot of people that do know my story before I got here, but the number of people that know now, especially in my profession and in my industry and other things, I'll be very curious to see how they react. I'm a little buoyed because folks that I talked to before the book came out and other things were very receptive and supportive, but you never know.
Oh, think of the thousands, if not millions, you'll be helping.
I hope so.
That's right.
From your lips to God's ears.
I'm sure some of your friends, family members, colleagues picked up the book right away, right?
Yes.
As I did. Yeah. And read the book. Can you give us, well, you don't got to tell us who, unless you want to. Can you tell us a reaction of someone that like sticks out to you, like something that they, because of how vulnerable you are in writing that story and just coming, and maybe they didn't know this about you. Can you give us one example of maybe how someone read that and came back to you and said, wow, Steve, you know, I didn't know that about you, or how that might change them?
Yeah, I'm working with a client and they had no idea. They were very supportive. They bought the book. They called me on Wednesday after the book came out. They'd read it. They got it a day or two earlier, so they didn't get it on Tuesday, but they got it a day or two earlier. Yeah. And they talked about how they were dealing with someone in their life that had some similar history and issues that I may have had in my life, and how they worked through it, and talking about how it was just nice to have someone say this out loud and talk about it. And so, you know, we for months we've talked about nothing about buying and selling of these dealerships and all these other sorts of things. And it was just touching that the person was like, thank you for writing the book. Of course. Because now it normalized, you know, they can talk to that with whoever they're dealing with.
That's going to make you feel
those sorts of issues. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I've had, you know, several examples of folks who are like that one of the folks I work with called me up and said, "Oh, I'm dealing with some things. I'd love to talk to you about fear dynamic technique number 4.
Yeah.
How did you do that? What do you mean by that sort of issue?" Just being willing to talk about in real life how that works.
Yeah.
And so
Somebody's going on the circuit. You know, I
I'm
see
telling
you.
you, and it's breaking right here on CBT News.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. No, it's a book that, for those of you that are watching, Fear Dynamics is the book. We're going to make a button right underneath this video that you're watching right now. So you are now just a click away from changing your life. And it's a phenomenal book. Again, congratulations in writing it. Soon to be best-selling author, Stephen Dietrich, and of course, the one and only Dave Cantin. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. This has been great. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Jim.
it.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Stephen.
much.
Yes.
Thank you, Dave.
And congrats.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for watching Inside M&A with Dave Cantin. Conversations for the industry, exclusively on the CBT Automotive Network. The Dave Cantin Group is the nation's leading advisory company in the automotive industry. To contact a mergers and acquisitions advisor from the Dave Cantin Group, visit davecantingroup.com.